This is Echoes, a U-Krant podcast. In it, Christien Boomsma, Rob van der Wal, and me, Tom Wilcox, introduce you to remarkable people and extraordinary events from 4 centuries of UG history. From persecuted Scottish students fleeing to 17th century Groningen to a Russian spy seducing a UG physicist. This is Aletta's sister, about Aletta Jacobs, who led at least as impressive a life as her famous sister. A young woman makes her way into a lecture hall at Amsterdam University. She is already a little older than the other students, 32, with a round face and broad shoulders. Her gaze is curious, a touch mischievous, perhaps. She looks briefly into the hall where the other students, all male, are looking for their seats. Then she arranges her long skirts and sits down herself. The professor, who at 27 is younger than she is, looks at her somewhat disdainfully. Miss Jacobs, I must generously confess to you that I would rather see a lady with knitting in her hands than on my lecture benches. What must this woman have thought when she was greeted like this by her lecturer, Willem Studer? Here we go again? Or perhaps she was so used to it that she hardly noticed. It was the year 1878. The student described was Aletta Jacobs. That's right, Aletta's sister. And she was the second female student ever to graduate from a Dutch university. Charlotte already had a whole life behind her when she came to Amsterdam. She had already trained as an apprentice pharmacist. She had done entrance exams for university and had studied pharmacy in Groningen for a full year. And in the same year that her sister, Aletta Jacobs, became the very first woman in the Netherlands to graduate with a degree in medicine, she started her studies in Amsterdam. Everyone knows Aletta, of course. She still steals the show. There are statues, streets named after her, endless portraits. At the UG, an exam hall, special positions, and a prize are named after her. But Charlotte, who became the very first female pharmacist, is virtually unknown in Groningen. But Charlotte was just as much of a pioneer as her sister. She, too, dedicated her life to women's rights and women's suffrage. And Charlotte, too, deserves recognition for her achievements. And these achievements are by no means small. For as smart and studious as Charlotte was, when she finished primary school, she went straight to a young women's school where she was taught traditional women's crafts and good manners. It was almost the only type of schooling available to girls in those years. For a long time, she still followed the traditional paths. As an unmarried woman, she kept her brother Sam's house. He owned a pharmacy in Arnhem. But then Sam got married, and that automatically meant Charlotte had to go back to her parents in Sappemeer. But in the meantime, the world had changed. Because in 1870, her little sister Aletta was the first girl admitted to the HBS, a secondary school. And while she was only allowed to sit in on classes and not participate, a year later her other sister, Frederica, became the first official female student at the same school. In 1875, it was Charlotte's turn. Even though she was already 28 by this point, she still took the exam to become an apprentice pharmacist and took chemistry classes at the HBS, where she was registered as Miss Jacobs.
My craving for a more independent position than I had then led me to propose to my parents that I study to be a pharmacist,
she wrote years later. And in 1877, 6 years after Aletta enrolled, Charlotte indeed became the second female student at the University of Groningen. In Groningen she was kindly received. Groningen professors were quite tolerant. 2 of them, Van der Wijk and Tellegen, had even published brochures advocating for better education for women. But in her second year in Amsterdam, people weren't as welcoming. But after a while, even they warmed to her. Studer gradually became friendlier, and she even referred to Professor Jan Willem Gunning, one of her other teachers, as her fatherly friend. Still, competing with the men was tough. When Charlotte wanted to do a PhD in Groningen after graduation, as Aletta had done before her, she was refused because Professor Pieter Cornelis Plugge preferred a male candidate, someone who had been working for him for some time for free. So she went to work as a pharmacist, the first female pharmacist in the Netherlands. She first worked for a few years at the General Hospital in Utrecht before leaving for Batavia. There, she ran her own pharmacy for over 20 years. It wasn't until 1907 that a second apothecary came to the Dutch East Indies. Charlotte always made sure she had female assistants, who had to apply with a letter in Amsterdam to get the job. Charlotte was involved in founding a branch of the Association for Women's Suffrage in the Indies and a study fund for training female indigenous doctors. When she returned to the Netherlands in 1913, she remained active in the fight for women's suffrage until her death in 1916. In short, Charlotte was an icon too. But hardly anyone knows that. When there was an exhibition on Aletta at the University Museum in 1979, Charlotte was barely mentioned. An accompanying booklet contained only a few lines about her. In the current Aletta Jacobs room in the University Museum, containing a desk and trunk as showpieces, Charlotte is missing. There is not even room for her in any of the display cases highlighting the merits of some other UG women. There is a reason for this. Aletta had a prominent role in the Dutch women's movement. Charlotte made a career in the Dutch East Indies, so she literally disappeared from sight in the Netherlands. Aletta published a book, Memories. Charlotte left no memoirs. Besides, she was much less interested in being prominent than her famous sister. She did not have the gift of presiding over meetings, which she was compelled to do, writer and artist Marie Kooi van Zegelen said of her. She attracted less attention than her sister, Het Farmaceutisch Weekblad wrote after her death. Here and there, her name still pops up, and there are still female students receiving scholarships from the Charlotte Jacobs Study Fund. She had stipulated in her will that her inheritance should help girls from the Netherlands as well as Indonesia with university studies. There are a few pharmaceutical institutes that bear her name, and The Hague has a Charlotte Jacobslaan. We're still waiting for a Charlotte Jacobs room in a Groningen University building and a showcase in the University Museum. This episode was written and researched by Inge de Wilde and Christien Boomsma. Voice by Tom Wilcox and Giulia Fabrizi. Sound by Rob van der Wal. Literature about Charlotte can be found in the show notes.